This is Social Justice Issues in Adult Education, AEDT 4130U. This is presented by Brennan Ullman, and we'll be looking at PBL B. So my connection. My attempt to form a group with this PBL fell flat on this particular assignment. As I went to Blackboard to look for peers struggling with either a topic or group members in need, my findings came up short. However, I was still able to use Blackboard in the discussion from peers to gain insight into a variety of problems centering around oppression. I had extensive conversations over these past few weeks with family members who work with oppressed individuals every day, to hear their opinion and gain some interesting research points. During weeks 5 to 8, I was able to better understand and reside with a variety of problems as they relate to discrimination and oppression, and our Blackboard discussions surely helped. With over 4 million Canadians suffering some kind of special need or disability, I thought no better way to start. So we'll start by looking at ableism, a form of oppression. Stated, a form of discrimination or social prejudice against people with disabilities. It may also be referred to as disability discrimination, physicalism, handicapism, or disability oppression. Now, attitudes in society that devalue and limit the potential of persons with disabilities is ableism. People with disabilities are assumed to be less worthy or with respect to considerations. So less able to contribute and take part, therefore less value to other people. Ableism can be conscious or unconscious and is embedded within institutions, systems, broader, and all sorts of cultures. So big problem that I came across was our Canadian government with regards to regulations for PWDs, people with disabilities. And going into that, we found a really unique individual, Mark Waffer. He is a franchise owner with Tim Hortons, and on the National about 2 weeks ago, I came across an excellent 15-minute report on Mark Waffer, a local Torontonian who is making big headlines. For the better part of 20 years now, Mark has been employing people with disabilities at a number of his own Tim Hortons franchises. He is truly making one of the biggest impacts and changes amongst local business owners, as well as big box conglomerates looking to address the underlying profit issues within business. And Mark states this is not charity, just good for business. And being born partially deaf, Mark has never been confronted with something that he can't do, so why should anyone else? Now, many of my family members work with special needs individuals, and myself, I have camp counseled at the YWC Durham many summers in the special needs camps. And the biggest underlying issue is the fact that society views someone with a disability or as a special need to need some kind of adjustment or to be cared for in some particular way. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of misconceptions come in. So the big picture. I will never seem to get a job. I'm just not good enough. I'm broken and somehow need to be fixed. I'm asking for just too much. These are all issues that someone with special needs or disability deals with every day. And ableism is very apparent in the workforce when it comes to accessibility. And the biggest thing is our Canadian government with respect to protection and hopefully changing the way that things have been. So some misconceptions that I came across that were very interesting is according to Statistics Canada, 51% of Canadians with disabilities are unemployed or not in the workforce. But some believe that the number is closer to 70% after factoring in people who give up. More of the disabled have a trade certificate, sitting at 11%, than the regular population at 9%. And in addition to this, 17% of adults with disabilities have a college degree or diploma, the exact same as the rest of the general public. Now, contrary to popular belief, disabled people require very little accommodation in the workplace, and according to the Conference Board of Canada statistics, only about 20% require any form of accommodation on the job. And within this 20%, 65% of the cases were between $1 and $500. Fairly reasonable for any small business owner. The disabled are very motivated employees. Research studies are sparse, but there are several forms of evidence that show that employees who have disabilities work 90% safer than others and have attendance records 86% greater. They stay on the job for 5 times longer also. Just an image that I found that really resided with me as I have 3 young girls and all of these Disney princesses are in my life. And This is taken from Mark, as he says, "A person in a wheelchair has to be innovative just to get through the day. Imagine how that mindset helps a pod or a team at a workplace." Now this immediately struck me because I never thought about that, and you can only imagine that someone's mentality that has to deal with varying issues from, right from the start of their day, right in the morning. You can only imagine how that person can build an idea or a thought, or really think outside of the box with respect to a number of issues. So it's funny that you look at our perception of what's right from wrong, and when you look at these Disney princesses and nearly 100 years of production at Disney Studios, it's funny how all these princesses kind of follow the exact same norm. Thin set, pretty attractive, blue eyes, nice hair. It's just really funny how there's never been an adaptation that centers around any kind of disability or learning disorder or anything to that respect. And it's weird to think where this standard is coming from and why it is set like that. I remember about 5 years ago now, there was a Disney movie that came out centering around this princess here. It was called The Princess and the Frog, and unbeknownst to me, I had no idea that this was a very, very big deal for Disney and the future of Disney, because this was the first African American princess that they've ever put in a Disney film. I never even thought about that until it was actually addressed in the media, and it became this big ordeal. So it's just funny when you look at where things have come and where things are and what matters to us now, as opposed to, say, even 10 to 30 years ago. So we'll look at the legal protection and digging into the Charter of Rights as it affects people with disabilities. So prohibiting discrimination means ensuring equal opportunity and accommodating the needs of persons with disabilities. In Canada, the right to equality and the duty to accommodate are guaranteed by law. Now this is stated, but unfortunately it's not always the case. Under the Act, federal regulated employees are bound by law to prevent discrimination and provide access and support to individuals with disabilities. However, employees are required to accommodate persons with disabilities only to the point of the employer's undue hardship. Health and safety and cost reasons may make accommodations that are too extraordinary and therefore too difficult or hazardous for the employee to carry out. Now, the Act obligates federal regulated employees to make very reasonable efforts to eliminate this kind of discrimination, which might result from rules, practices, or barriers that have an adverse impact on the designated group. So although there is laws in place, it seems like there's a slight loophole, whereas if anything is kind of above and beyond with regards to cost or effort, it seems like an employer doesn't have to accommodate. And we see that in many issues, and one of the bigger ones currently is relating to, I guess, access and being able to access employment. And recently in the news, the TTC in Toronto has become under fire. We're looking at regional problems, and it just seems that it is no more apparent today than 10 years ago that the government is seeming to make strides to help these millions of Canadians. So according to an article, basically there was a wheelchair lift on 2 or 3 buses that came to help a gentleman. The first bus that he tried to get on with his wheelchair, the lift was inaccessible, and it was not able to move. The motor wasn't working properly. So they called for another bus. That bus arrived. That lift didn't work. At this point, the gentleman's now been waiting hours. They eventually brought a bus that worked but wouldn't lower. So when he got to his destination, the motorized compartment wouldn't lower him off the bus. So they actually had to call the fire department to take him off the bus. So 3 buses, half a day's effort and waiting around, and nothing was really done for this gentleman other than a simple apology. Now, the TTC should be frequently inspecting its wheelchair lifts and maintaining them in good repair. This has to be a standard, especially with how big the city has grown and how hard it is already for people to get around. Basically, you have to be respectful of all people, especially those with disabilities and special needs. It's time for the TTC to install proper guidelines that have to be adhered to, in the day-to-day job, that is more so than just checking on the lift and making sure that it goes up and down, because it is very important for a number of Canadians. The TTC's also stated that they're looking to be exploring elevators in approximately 40 subway stations, which would grant access to better parts of Toronto through the subway system. So It's interesting to see that such a big company like the TTC, multi-billion-dollar organization, it's just funny to see that they're still behind the times and still trying to play catch up with respect to access and creating better grounds for all. So many of us have identified the biggest underlying issues within our country and beyond, and it is important that we all bring light to these areas of oppression and discrimination in an effort to bring down the barriers by addressing all of the current issues. So it's important that our Canadian government looks at the misconceptions presented throughout employment opportunities and continue to improve access and infrastructure as it relates to people with disabilities. Thank you very much for bringing my PBL, and we'll head back to the Adobe Connect room to further discussion. Here's some references.